Welcome everybody to this audit and risk meeting for another year. I'd just like to start with the karakia, whakataka te ho, kia te uru, whakataka te ho, kia te tona, kia makina kina, kia uta, kia matarata, kia tai. I hia kei ana te o tā kura, he te au, he hoka, he ho ho, te hei mori ora. Cease the winds from the west, cease the winds from the south, let the breeze blow over the land, let it blow over the ocean, let the red-tipped dawn come in with a sharpened ear, a touch of frost, a promise of a glorious day, a focus on the environment. So once again, welcome everyone. Just to go through the agenda items. Firstly, apologies. We have no apologies recorded.
Kate, sorry.
This
Kate
is apology.
she's doing a bit. She's just got to get out of a gorge.
Okay, right.
To get reception.
Okay, noted.
Richard messaged me to say she's in apology too.
Right, two apologies. We have and Alan Sumble would usually attend these meetings. He's not on the committee, but he's also apologised for not being here. We don't have a public forum. In terms of the confirmation of the agenda, there is just a small correction to the recommendations in item 9.4, which we will bring up on the screen at the time. It's just the order of those recommendations. So just mentioning that for that purpose. Declarations of interest. You all know, we've sat through a few of these meetings. If you've got any interests, then they have to be declared. We have the minutes of the last audit and risk meeting, which were held on the 5th of December 2024. They're all there. If anyone has got an issue with any correction, please let me know. Otherwise, I would like to move that those minutes accepted. I can have a seconder.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Great. The open actions from that meeting, there was just one that I noticed. It was the in regards to the internal management audit update. Yes,
Yeah.
We have a date of the 31st of the 3rd as a due date. So just wondering if we've got any update on that.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to provide an update. The first internal audit around asset management was completed late last year, led by Tom. And in terms of that broader internal audit program, I have just been working through a reorganisation of my group, and we are setting up an organisational performance and planning team within an existing FTE. And so I've got a manager organisational performance and planning who'll be starting in mid-April. And we also have a dedicated resource, or a dedicated staff member for that team who will be focusing on risk, business continuity and internal audit, because one of the challenges of some of these services is we haven't had dedicated resource to run it, to manage it, to make sure recommendations are then picked up. So one of the manager's first jobs will be to recruit for that role, and then we'll be able to get that up and running. In parallel, though, we've been working with other councils to see how they do their internal audit programs, and we've got they've been very willing to share documentation. So we're hoping to get a tender or an RFP out for that internal audit program, so that it would just be a 3-year program of a couple of, or however many audits a year. So that's happening in parallel. So the short answer is it's in progress, and there's light at the end of the tunnel. But
Would you like us to move that due date out? Is that, or is it okay just as it is?
No, look, I think it's fine as it is. That's the data. I would take some ownership of that. I think I just probably overcommitted to the committee, and I discussed with Andrew a number of times. And we just haven't had the capacity while we've had a number of other external reviews in terms of efficiency reviews and Te Kora and everything else that does take a lot of resource to do. So that's not an excuse, it's just a simple fact in terms of capacity, but recognising the need to do this and having a dedicated resource within Amanda's team means we will have someone focused on the risk work, which has been carried by Andrea, and then internal audit and business continuity, which we haven't had in the past. So it is late and there's no getting around that, but we haven't had capacity to deliver it, but we're confident we will in this half year. So I think leaving it there, because that was the due date, and just making sure that we keep the committee or the subcommittee appraised of the progress we make on that action.
Very good. Thank you, Richard. Right, our first item is item 9.1, Audit and Risk Work Program. Nick.
Okay, so this is paper we always bring to the first subcommittee meeting of the calendar year. So just to outline what the work program is for the rest of the year. It does have the attached work program, does assume that there's 4 meetings for the year, but of course we've got the elections coming up. So I note in there the items that are on the December agenda won't be covered in December, because after the election, council has to set up committees and reconfirm who's on them. So typically there's no audit and risk in December in an election year. Those items will fall into the March 1st meeting of 2026, assuming that there's an audit and risk subcommittee set up. But the March, June and September ones, that's what we're proposing to have on those agendas. Very similar to last year. There was a bit of a tweak that you as the subcommittee agreed to slightly different timing around legislative compliance, that there'd be an annual comply with report to you, and then a report back on legal doing audits on 2 directorates on a rolling cycle. So that's reflected. Rest of it is pretty much as standard. Only other thing to note is September meeting, depending on the timing. Currently that's set for early September. That's probably not going to work from the auditors completing their annual report work. So whether or not the whole meeting pushes back to later in September, or whether it goes ahead, but then there's an extra audit and risk to deal with the annual report, we'll confirm that later in the year. But essentially, yeah, it's just a matter of whether you're happy with the work program as it stands, or there's anything else that you want to change or amend.
Any comments on that? It's pretty much a rollover on that. So, okay, so we have the recommendation that the Audit and Risk Committee notes this report and endorses the proposed work program for the 25 calendar year. Got no further discussion. Somebody would like to move that? Thank you, Alexa. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Gary. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That's carried. Right, item 9.2, we have the Treasury report. And Nick, you're going to do that for us?
Yep, so this covers the attached report from Bancorp, just outlines our total debt position. Council debt has reduced from the last report, because this is based as at 31 December, the balances. But as at the previous quarter, we had an additional 15 million short-term funding for working capital until rates came in. That's been repaid, so we're back down to our core debt of 25 million. Port has an additional 122, almost 123 million on top of that. So total debt through LGFA of just under 150 million. And the other thing that the key thing that the Bancorp report shows is they just give their compliance measures that they check the parameters around liquidity, etc., and the interest cover back to our Treasury policy and the covenants that are in the LGFA. So they give that assurance to you that we're compliant with those requirements.
So Nick, the interest rate on that debt, is it variable, fixed? How's it?
If you have a look on, where's a good one? Even if you look on, so page
23.
Well, page 23 of the Indiligent, but it's the last page. There we've got, we take out 25 million and we split it into 5 loans of $5 million each. One is short term, so that's just commercial paper that's floating rate when we take it out. And then of the other two, 2 are floating rate notes and 2 are floating rate bonds. So the bonds are fixed. So they're the ones that are fixed at 5.7. And the other ones are all floating with quarterly resets to the 90-day bank bill rate.
Yeah. Any questions on that? Yes, okay.
Yeah, Nick, so we've got that 25 million that we've got as core debt sitting there. And we've got a very good fund working over, I think it's about 29 million now. But if we look at this, if we look at the 25, the 220, and that's, I think the average is 5.07%. And providing we're earning more in our fixed managed fund, it's probably worthwhile doing that. So when do we actually review or look at whether we should retire that debt with that 25 million? Yeah, with 25 million of the managed fund, and say, well, it would be better for us to, when do we review that?
Well, effectively, we review that every 3 years with the LTP and the financial strategy.
Yeah.
So that's a key part of what we did. And when we first brought in the idea of getting the external debt, that was not the LTP we've just done. It was the previous one.
Correct.
And that was around that. If we had a view going through that we were going to get less return than we're paying in interest, then yeah, we'd potentially have a look at that.
Yeah.
But it also comes down to the managed fund is used to offset general rates. This debt relates to other, as core debt that largely sits on areas where we've got the capital spend through flood and drainage schemes, in particular. So you've sort of got the benefit of the fund goes to the general ratepayer and everybody. This debt cost funnels through into specific targeted rates, if you like.
Yeah, and which they're getting the benefit of the very good rate from. Yeah, good. Thanks, mate. Thank you.
We have no further questions.
Happy to move?
Yep,
Second.
that'll be good. All right. So, recommendation is that we note the report and the attached Bancorp Treasury report dashboard. So we have a move and a second. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
And against? That's carried. Thank you. So we're racing along, Richard. Yeah. Okay.
Because they're big things.
Item 9.3, the managed fund portfolio performance update. Once again, Nick.
Yeah, so this has this paper has the attached portfolio performance report for the quarter from JB Ware. So it's a sort of half dozen page summary of how the portfolio has been performing, general market update and commentary as well. As Councillor Malcolm just mentioned, the fund as at 31 December sitting just over 29 million. That's increased just over 2 million for this financial year, so in the 6 months. So returns over the 6-month period been very good. There was a bit of volatility towards the end of the year post the US election, but it's still performing particularly well. So yeah, really it's just open to any questions, whether I can answer them or we need to go back and ask them if JB Ware, happy to do that.
No questions?
No questions.
Well,
It's certainly interesting to note in their commentary about just the impact of the US markets and that being bigger shift. So this was the December year end December quarter report. Interesting to see what the next quarter has for us in terms of the fund movement. So
America will be great again.
Very different.
Yes, America will be great. Okay, Kerry,
Just one quick question. The policy is to retain the appreciation and value of the fund within the fund as opposed to reviewing it.
Well, no, we don't have a policy on that. Again, what we do is we look at what our plan would be as we set the LTP. We didn't make any assumptions in the LTP about withdrawing funds, but we can do. You know, there's no reason. I think over time, I think we need to have a look at whether we do that. We currently don't really need the cash other than that period where we get close to, you know, where our rates are coming in and we run out of working capital cash, which is different than this fund, you know. So we don't want to just be pulling money in and out of a long-term fund. But we could have a view that, you know, for example, we take whatever the return is and we're going to look to bring X amount of it back, but you know, withdraw a portion of our earnings every year. And we did look at that, or I looked at that as a way to maybe bridge that working capital. But that's back when we were only sort of looking at needing working capital, you know, to bridge that gap of, you know, 1 million or so. But now that our gap is sort of getting to 10 to 15 million, it doesn't sort of work from that point of view. So at the moment, we're just reinvesting it. Ideally, we did have in the LTP, because we had that, you know, the fund continues to grow. It is good to be growing this because this forms a key part of our liquidity requirement for the LGFA debt, that we have to effectively hold 10% of our debt in liquid assets, either cash or something like a managed fund that can be converted to cash. So having this, you know, gives us buffer in our liquidity covenant with LGFA. So, you know, there's a benefit in not withdrawing it and making sure that we are building it up.
Another question. Yep. And the analysis of how the fund has performed over a number of years, do we see that? Does that come to us, or is a comparison done of previous years?
Typically what comes here is just the, you know, the quarterly reports, which obviously they're rolling quarter, so then you get your annual view. But were you here at the last meeting in December? Because in December we presented an independent review of the portfolios, the managed fund performance, and they did that measure over a 6-year period. So they looked at how it had actually performed over the last 6 years. And that's something that we have down on the work program, to do a review of the, you know, of the fund manager and the performance every 3 years. So we do that on a 3-yearly cycle.
Right. Yeah, sorry, I did miss that. I think. The other question I have is around we have this and its performance looks to be good. Do we ever do a review of all of our balance sheet, all of our assets, and look at our port assets, and would we be better off realising those into this type of fund?
Yeah, we do. We did that several years ago. We did a review of the shareholding in the port. You know, we got PwC to do it. Looked at different options of what could happen. They looked at the returns of the port versus our other investments. But I've also presented some of that in previous workshops as well, done the analysis of how the two various investments, what the return is. What you got to realise is what you see here is the return here is your return on the total portfolio. So, or it's the total revenue. So it includes interest, dividends, and capital gain on shares. What commonly happens is then you get a percentage in this, and then people look and they compare that percentage to the dividend percentage that the port returns against their value on our balance sheet. But remember, that's only dividend. When you actually look on, from memory, when we'd looked at what the long run return on our investment in the port is, we've had an average return of, I think it's over 11% when you count in the capital gain. So in fact, our investment in the port on a like-for-like basis is outperforming this. But that's not to say that you don't still review where you're at with it. But we did do that. I'm trying to remember. It obviously wasn't this triennium. It would have been the last triennium. We did the PwC review, and council had a look at it and made the decision at that point to retain, full ownership of the port.
Yep. Yeah. No, the only reason I asked that is around this provides a level of diversification that the port doesn't, because the port's assets are quite ring fenced into some quite specific activities.
Yep.
And certainly the port activity itself, which is quite capital intensive and capital hungry, versus a very highly performing property portfolio, but they are quite restrained. And I guess it's about how regularly we do that review to ensure that for the future we are sitting with the right.
Yeah, and that's up to you around the table to decide whether you want that done and how frequently. We are lucky that our port does have some natural diversification, particularly with the property, but even within the port, their revenue streams. But as you point out, it's nowhere near like the diversification you get through a portfolio like we've got with the managed fund.
But what we've also been very lucky with is the port are very proficient property developers, and but if that proficient property development had some hiccups, as other corporates or companies have done, then that could change our situation quite dramatically, as it has done for others. So it's just something we need to be mindful of. No, that's good. Thank you.
I think one of the things that we do have in our favour, Gary, is we do actually have good communication with the directors of the port, and it's certainly something that I've been aware of since being on this council, that there's no secrets, and they're certainly open to any kind of strategic direction that we might have. So, but in the meantime, I mean, I get the feeling they're doing a pretty good job. And the other thing is that the revaluations of the port assets do flow their way through into our statement of comprehensive income, and show at the bottom of that report. So either there's a surplus or a deficit. So it's feeding through, although the cash isn't. So yeah, and I guess it's about the same, Nick, with this investment fund too. That the increase in the value of the investment fund flows through into the statement of comprehensive income, but not cash.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Part of it comes through as cash. The interest and dividend portion is still in our scree as cash.
Yeah.
Well, as if you like, it's above the line, but it's not cash. Yeah. Whereas our other interest and dividends that we receive are cash.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is a bit of a blurring of cash versus non-cash.
Splitting that takes place.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you,
Gary. Any other questions? Okay, so we have the recommendation that we note this report and the attached portfolio performance report.
Yeah.
We'll move, Gary. Thank you. And Kevin, second. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? That's carried. Okay, this is a bit more meaty. The managed fund and the SIPO review. and it's 9.4. Okay, do you want to lead off on this one, Nick, as well? Expecting some conversation around this.
Yeah, so we had the independent report at the last meeting, and we said out of that we'd go away and have a look at it, have discussions with JB Ware and get their views on the points that were raised. There wasn't a huge amount raised, but there was some recommendations that that had been made that council could consider. So I wanted to see what JB Ware's view on those points were. And then the other thing was there was a little bit of discussion around the independent review used a different provider to measure ESG controversies. So they came up with some other ones, and there was a bit of discussion around that. And one of the other things that, apart from looking at the recommendations, the Audit and Risk Subcommittee also wanted us to have a look at the ESG parameters and whether there was any changes that could be made to that. So I've gone through and discussed this with JB Ware. They've provided the bulk of the information that's in the paper and the discussion sheet as their comments on the particular areas. And then out of that, we've drafted the recommendations, of which there's 9, that cover the various points that were made in the review. And the idea would be that depending on where you land with those recommendations, if you agreed with those, we'll go away and make all of those things happen. That would necessitate us bringing a revised SIPO back to the June meeting of the subcommittee, so that you could then go, okay, here's how it looks with everything in there. Assuming you're okay with that SIPO, you could endorse it to go to council for approval. So that's how we would action it. Most of the things are fairly straightforward. JB Ware didn't really have an issue with things like a change in the structure of our fixed interest. Currently, I think that's point B. Currently, we split it 35% New Zealand, 10% international bonds. The recommendation out of the report was you could weight more of it towards international. JB Ware was, they're comfortable either way. So we've recommended, and they said, just split it 50-50. So that would be 22.5% to each asset class. They didn't agree with allocating anything to emerging markets. The commentary on that is in the body of the paper. They were comfortable with looking at introducing a private equity asset class, which was recommended, and that used that to replace the property asset class we've currently got. We had this debate when the SIPO was put in place many years ago about whether we needed a separate property asset class, particularly given that we've got property investments through the port. Private equity is becoming more mainstream. That a lot of the super and KiwiSaver funds are, particularly the growth and aggressive ones, are starting to allocate private equity shares. So they recommend that we did that as well. Only thing that I sort of said on that is because it is a new asset class, I suggested that you as Audit and Risk might want to have a workshop with them, just so that you could discuss it directly with them. They do raise some points in there in the discussion that's in the discussion section that because of how they would invest it, they would go through private equity funds. That would mean that because of how those funds are structured, we'd probably have to just have a rewording to our ESG section and parameters. So I think, as Audit and Risk, before that change gets made, you probably would benefit from the conversation directly with JB Ware just to understand that. But overall, I'd agree with them that I don't think there's any issues there. I think it would be a good switch to take out property and put private equity. There was a few things that were largely administrative, like the just the report against the CPI benchmark, SIPO reviews. They agreed, and I agree that I think it should stay 3 yearly, because I don't think the SIPO needs to be chopping and changing, any earlier than that, unless something specific comes up. But it should be a document that largely endures, long term, which matches the timeframes and the investment parameters of the fund itself. And then the other one, the last, that one H, the issue of the ESG controversies, and we've put there in to retain the existing red flag because they'll continue to use their provider. But what they recommended is really their view is the only feasible way to do it would be to create a supplementary list of excluded investments. And then so you would choose who it is, which isn't ideal, but they have said they do that for other clients do that. They will specifically say we do not want to invest in XYZ. So they'd say that on the basis that if you change the parameters of the exclusion, say if you went to orange, you're going to markedly increase the number of companies, but it's not so much the number of companies, it's the capital value of those companies. Effectively, it's probably going to wipe out about a third of investable companies because a lot of the big tech companies, banks, etc., are in that they've still got orange flags. So yeah, so you would change the structure of the portfolio significantly if that was the case.
Just in terms of informing documents in this review, recently we had the Korowai review that suggested that we were rather conservative with our investment. Did that feed into this at all?
No, because
that coincidentally sort of popped up.
Yeah, and the results of that came out after this, so it hadn't been considered in the independent review, and we haven't looked at that subsequently.
But we will.
Well, we'll look at that as part of as we go through the review of the recommendations of that report. Yeah.
Well, it probably feeds into this to a certain extent. If we're looking at sort of looking at public equity, perhaps there's a higher return there than.
It does sort of have a little bit of a crossover. JB Ware provided some analysis on if we move to a 60-40 growth split, so increased our growth percentage, and that analysis is attached. It doesn't actually move the dial that much on what the expected return is, but potentially it'll increase your volatility. And when we did the SIPO, again, the Treasury Management Policy, we acknowledge that because of where we're at with our balance sheet, capital has council has the ability to absorb more risk, but because we're a public company or public entity, we don't really see that there's the willingness to. So there's the capacities there, which is what got pointed out in the other review. But yeah, public entities like us, if we're seeing big fluctuations and particularly big capital amounts wiped out, that may come back and it's fine. I don't think that's going to be particularly digestible to the public.
The other thing that I noted in this was the Ericsson's review. I guess it's your paragraph 11, looking at the ESG guidelines, that under their parameters they would have included more investments under their sort of red flag. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so when their report, if you remember, because they used a different provider, then there's different providers that'll do the analysis and go, here's where they see it. So there was 4, of which Rio Tinto was one, Apple and Meta were the other 2 that were on Ericsson's list, and then there was a fourth one that wasn't a red flag controversy, but they raised that it was that Aristocrat Leisure. They said that it actually their revenue percentage from gambling operations was greater than what we had, and JB Ware, who were here when they looked at that, they acknowledged that that had actually slipped through their provider and stayed on their list, and it should have been out. So they divested that one. But of just the pure red flag controversies, there was three that were on Ericsson's provider list that weren't on JB Ware's. And as I said, two of them were Apple and Meta. This is where you get into on JB Ware's, they would have orange controversies. So that's where you get to that. But the other one was Rio Tinto, which has always been a point of discussion around this.
I think this one's really tricky. It's I don't like the idea of carving out. It doesn't. Sorry, I don't think it's the right way to go. We sort of have to be able to stick with our exclusions within a way of doing it, rather than picking out a company that we just don't want to have. Yeah, I think that's a hard way to do it. I think we've got to have a policy that has exclusions, and we leave it there. I think to go and individually carve out things is a very difficult and not a pragmatic way of doing it. I don't know, it's just my thoughts on it. And I also had concerns about Te Korowai, thinking that we should, that needs to be looked at how that's brought into this report next time, probably.
In what way, Alexa?
The 50-50. I remember, I can't find the report right now. My internet keeps going off here, but in the Te Korowai thing, it questioned the 50-50 percentages, and thought we might look at that. And I thought we needed to
Yeah, it did.
bring that across.
And the Ericsson's report said that based on us being a public entity, they could see, we could generate more returns, but they'd still recommended we stuck with the 50-50. But because it was raised, JB Ware did the analysis to show what if we moved to 60-40, so a higher growth percentage. In fact, in their analysis, which is in the attachments, it might have moved their expected returns sort of by about 0.2%. So then to take that risk of the fluctuations and potential volatility, it probably, I viewed it probably wasn't warranted. But to clarify, also they raised the issue of you could change your return parameters. By their suggestion was to put a holding company in the middle. So then you took the fluctuations out by allowing a holding company to give you effectively smooth returns, and they absorb the ups and downs. But that's sort of quite different to the discussion we're having here, because that's a whole structure, and there's a whole different cost structure to doing that. I see that as a separate conversation to whether you move away in the SIPO from the 50-50. And at this point, I'd sort of say that both Ericsson's and JB Ware have said stick with the 50-50. We'll restructure the some of that we do. The fixed assets will allocate evenly the bond, the fixed interest portion from where it is currently weighted towards New Zealand bonds. So we'll move a bit more of that to international bonds, and then also drop a portfolio allocation and a property allocation and move that to private equity.
Would there be a situation where something would trigger us to look at that holding company again?
I think the response to the Te Korowai report will,
and so we will have to look at it.
We'll have the discussion, because we'd have to go away and look at exactly. One thing was the 50-50, but they were sort of suggesting hold the investment a different way, and that we'd have to just have a look at that.
It was quite different, so we will have to come back to council. I think we might have indicated July. Might have been when we sort of said with an initial response to some of those recommendations, but there was a lot in those recommendations in that financial section of that report that we would need to give consideration to council, you know, in terms of the advice we provide the council table, and you'll have to think very carefully about. Related to this, but also very different in some ways. So I don't think you need to be holding up these decisions on the basis of Te Kuruwai. We're going to have to go through that and bring that back. And that won't be a quick exercise.
Kevin.
Yeah, I thought Te Kuruwai completely misrepresented this fund, and the thought of a holding company around it just didn't add up at all in any sense. It would be different if you put the port in with that fund, possibly, but then I still wouldn't do it because what we've got happening as well. The place for me to look at, just agreeing with you there, Alexa, around the ESGs is when we do our SIPO or when we do our selection of our provider.
Yeah.
If we want to sit around this table here, putting companies in and out.
No, I don't want to do that. That was
No, I'm just agreeing with you. Yeah. I think that's all around the decision we make when we review JB Ware and when we review their SIPO. And if we pick JB Ware again and we're a bit concerned about some of their SCG parameters, well, we simply say, have you got the best provider? Bang, bang. And that's the way I'd be looking at that. Your 50-50 balance. I remember 1987 well. I remember 2008, 2009 very well. But I do not want to, I don't want the phone calls that we will get if we change that 50-50 parameter around when we come into our next global financial crisis. That's a very good, that's performing very well. It's a balanced portfolio that the swings and roundabouts sort of go with it. And I think as a publicly owned entity, whatever you want to call us, that's where we should be in those parameters. Yeah, and I'll be, yeah. That's where I'd sit with that, and having experience of, probably from Otago Community Trust and the likes of major funds that we've dealt with, comfortable.
Yeah. Nick, in terms of, from my point of view, in terms of these recommendations, the private equity allocation is a key one that we need to look at. Could you give us a little bit more detail on how that would work? What is the mechanism? And how would we invest in private equity? They're separate funds, aren't they? I think somewhere in the paper you've got 3 or 4 separate funds. Can you just sort of talk over, give us a little bit of information around that?
So what did they?
They're saying 2.5 million, aren't they? 10% going in.
Oh yeah. So from sort of so paragraph 17, so 17 to 20, with 21 being the recommendation, is where it talks about private equity. And so this is the information that's in here is from JB Ware. So because effectively private equity is you're just investing in companies that aren't listed.
Yeah.
So the issue with it previously has been, one, you've got to have access to those companies to be able to invest, and two, when you do, you while the returns can outperform listed companies, there's no liquidity. So it's a quite a different asset class. But through various funds that are now being set up to invest in private equity, you can now invest in and out of those funds. And so you sort of are investing in private equity, but through funds. And they're suggesting their preferred fund is this Hamilton Lane Global Private Asset Fund. So they are proposing, effectively, they would invest 5% in that. Yeah, that fund in turn will be investing in numerous private equity investments globally, and we'd still retain, the liquidity to get in and out of that fund. So that's where it's sort of become more attractive to your, to your big fund managers and the fund managers doing your Kiwi Savers and super and everything, that these other funds are now providing that investment mechanism rather than you having to pick who am I going to, which companies, off-market companies am I going to invest in.
Can I just confirm, just in terms of what you're recommending through your paper though, Nick, is not that decision's made, but a decision is made to ask JB where to come and run a session to have a more fulsome discussion on this asset class? Is that's the recommendation?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think because of the questions you're asking, I'm not the expert, be easier to get JB Ware in front of you. But if you had seen enough just through what's here and you went, no, we really don't want to get into private equity, let's take it off the table, then, you know, we go, okay, well, let's not worry about it. And you could probably make the rest of it, and then we'll just move on with changing the SIPO. But if you're seeing enough that you go, yeah, you're interested in considering that private equity, I'd suggest let's get JB Ware, just get them online, workshop for an hour, ask the questions, and then you can make the call from there in June as to whether you go with it or not.
Yeah. That's fine. Look, Kevin, I'll just get you in a second. I just want to acknowledge Alan, Councillor Somerville. He has sort of taken me aside. He's looked at this paper quite extensively, and in paragraph 20 of the report, it's there. It states it's unlikely that there'll be a complete alignment with the regional council's exclusions in regards to the red flags, the ESG. So on the basis of that, Alan's saying, you know, what's the control do we have if we get private equity around the ESG? So I'm throwing that out there just as part of this conversation. He's not here to do it himself. So yeah, but it's
and that was one of the reasons why, with that comment in paragraph 20, that I would suggest that before you made a decision on whether you go private equity, that you have that discussion and fully understand those impacts, because for different councillors, they might have different levels of comfort with where this type of asset class investment might sit, particularly from an ESG portfolio point of view.
Yeah. Look, I'm comfortable to have that chat with JB Ware. It does make sense, but you've got to remember we're doing 5% of our portfolio, which is 1.25 million, based on the 25. And if this private equity does 5% better than our 11% that we're already getting, that's only 60 grand. So again, I'm not saying no to the 60 grand, but just what we've got to remember is, and then therefore there is 60 grand. What risk are we taking for that 60 grand? So I'm happy to have that chat with them. Yeah, but it's not going to revolutionise the returns of this portfolio, even if it does 20% better. But it's certainly worthwhile having that chat. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, Kate's here. Hi, Kate.
Hi, thank you. Look, it's an interesting discussion. I've just got one question about the recommendations. And it's the one that we do the SIPO to remain 3 yearly. I've got no problems with that in general terms, except for I would be frustrated as a councillor wanting to come in and change things if it was only something I could do in my 3rd year. And I'm wondering in this instance whether we do 2 years with the intent of doing it for 3 years thereafter. And that gives the next council a chance to actually change things.
I think the reason why I said stick with 3 years, that's what we have on the work program that we do. But in fact, if you remember, the whole bringing in the ESG change to the SIPO was out of cycle. So it is like, it's set formally on, we will do it every 3 years in the cycle that we've got, but that doesn't mean that you can't do other reviews. If you see something that you go, oh, we really want this to be reconsidered and we'd like that, we don't want to wait another 18 months, 2 years to the next review, you can recommend it be done at any time. But it's just, the more formal that we schedule will be on a 3 yearly cycle.
Okay, no, thank you.
Any further? Yeah.
Yeah, so just I guess to say, I certainly agree with that. Private equities and just understanding that further through the workshop. So 100% backing that. And when I was doing some thinking around this and doing some research, I sort of just went back to our ESG policy that we put in place 18 months ago, and just to sort of remind myself that when it comes to that ESG controversies, red flag, exclusion, there's a whole lot of other thresholds that we've got in there for other industries. So that was sort of, it is one important line, but one that's amongst others in terms of how we are excluding at the moment. So I'm certainly in favour of having it as a policy and not sort of picking names that we want to exclude. I think that policy approach, it's just the best approach for ensuring longevity of decision making, really. And then lastly, as I was doing some sort of research into this, I was just looking at what other sort of funds are doing, what other people in our same position around the country, and there were some that you could look at. The community trusts around the country, and if I had JB Ware in the room again, I would ask them some questions, because some of those community trusts do have other global principles that are aligning to. Sort of there's a UN directive on ESG investments and the likes, and so there's a number of these sort of global ESG directives that are out there. So I'd be interested to know their response, but we can save that for the next group. Okay. So those are my thoughts on those recommendations.
Jerry?
Yeah, I agree. I think having the workshop with JB Ware, seek their advice, their more in-depth understanding of how the investments will sit. Certainly the private equity position potentially concerns me a little bit. So yeah, whether that is something we wish to be considering for the low level that's actually that it's going to be worth, then yeah, so let's get them in the room. Thanks.
Private equity is up to 10%, isn't it?
5% was recommendation.
Yeah, the Ericsson's report recommended up to 10%, but and then they commented you could do that by switching your property allocation to that. But I think our property allocation is 0 to 10%. We just happen to aim for the mid ground of 5%.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, 5.
So Chair, I'm happy to start.
Property is 2 to 8%.
Before we do that, Kevin, I just wondered about the best way of doing this. Has anybody got any? I mean, look, there's quite a few endorsements or actions in this recommendation. Is there any that stands out that you don't agree with?
For me, it's I. So on the discussions we've had around the table, would be I is the only one that would change.
Okay, so let's just look at that one then. So
I'm happy to move.
So we'd prefer not to have a supplementary list.
Well, yeah, I'm happy to move from. I'm happy to move two. Happy to move 1 and 2, and 2 with the exclusion of I.
Yep. Okay.
So I'm happy to move that now. If I have a second, I'll leave that.
I'm just trying to see where you are.
No, it's not on there. It's
Oh,
this is different.
sorry.
Yeah, I've just
Of
clicked.
course.
I've just
It's
clicked
just-
2, Alexa.
It's just the numbering that's different.
Yeah.
In the one on
Yeah.
diligent,
I got confused
has got F, because the numbering, the letters got restarted after C.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So we have a mover to.
I'll second that.
Yep. Thank you, Alexa. Is there any further discussion around this? Okay, we'll put the motion. All those. Elliot, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Sorry.
Like there. I just wanted to highlight that I think if Rio Tinto is not, and this is I don't think it makes sense not to, cherry pick which things we add to a list, but I do think if a company like Rio Tinto is not, that probably highlights some sort of issue with the way the list is developed, and
So that's when
not
we
my
go back.
place to look into that, but yeah.
Okay, so I think the way we were doing it is we were moving right through to H. So we can have a further discussion about I. If we want to get, isn't that what you
No,
suggested?
I'm just saying I's gone.
The I's gone.
Yeah.
Okay.
We
And
kind
the
of
rationale
covered that.
behind that is what.
Sorry.
So the rationale behind that was the time to do that, I believe, is when we select our provider and ensure that their SCG Yeah, we concentrate on making sure that their process is agreeable to council at that stage, and if it's not, we can also, and which we did with that other, the one that they didn't kick out, that they subsequently kicked out. So it's just, yeah, I think we've never really sat down on the 2 times. We did, I know we did change our SCG, but we've never actually sat down when we've selected a provider and said, well, this is, we need to concentrate on that part of it. So I just think that's the time we need to do that. So what you're thinking, Alexa?
That's exactly how I understand it too, is that cherry picking, that's not our job. And we need to find a provider that we're happy with, that has the exclusions that we're happy with at that point within their
It's
business as usual.
clear.
Yeah, my point was just that it's clear that there's some stuff falling out of the current thing that is not ideal.
Yeah.
So that's the conversation for when we talk to.
Yeah, we're agreeing with it. Yeah.
Okay, well, we have that motion put, endorsing the actions, firstly noting the report and endorsing the actions A through to H. So we have a mover and a seconder. We've had discussion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
And against? Okay, that's carried. Thank you. Right, safety and wellbeing.
Did we do number 3? Was
Yeah,
number
there
3?
there was one more recommendation.
What have I done?
3. It was just
9.3.
19.
Oh, 3, no, oh, yes, we do. Okay, sorry.
Oh,
We'll move on there. Based on the Audit Risk Subcommittee direction, a revised psycho will be presented to the June Audit and
Happy
Risk
to move.
Subcommittee.
Second.
Okay, moving second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? No, that's carried. Well, that's thank you. So safety and wellbeing.
I didn't divide the private thing for Mr. Bowley. Move the truck out of the way.
So welcome Timmy, Mark and Kelly. Hand over to who's going to talk to us, Mark, is it?
Sure.
Yep.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So people in the safety team have had a good end to 2024 and a productive start to the year. On the health and safety side, we ensured ORC staff kept health and safety front of mind with a Safe Start campaign, and we've improved safety and emergency procedures in relation to violence and aggression with the introduction of new lockdown procedure and ETEX guidelines. And the team now have a total of 18 bow tie analysis workshops scheduled between now and July to review all our critical risks. On the people side, launched the recognition of service policy, the staff awards and one-to-ones training were real highlights. And this year we've continued supporting leaders in implementing new structures following staff consultation processes at the end of last year. And we've been really delighted with the calibre of people ORC's been attracting and what candidates are saying in terms of what they've heard about ORC as a place to work. I'll hand over to questions.
And Mark, the in paragraph 8 of your report, the comply with survey identified 2 areas of partial compliance. Can you just perhaps address those and what you're doing around those?
Yeah, I think one is to do with the lone, isolated and remote workers, which has been an ongoing project. We've made good traction with that. When it went to ELT, we just realised that we needed to do a little bit more talking with managers to inform the risk levels for each type of activities, because that directly informs whether just communicating via text and Microsoft Teams versus next step up, which is the Get Home Safe app and or the Garmin and Reach devices. So we want to ensure it's practical and we've got that right. So we've just got to finish those conversations and then finalise the policy settings. Thank you.
And multi-tenant
Um,
workplace risks was the other.
Yeah,
one.
multi-tenant workplace risks. So that's been addressed through the lockdown procedure and ETICS guideline, which was just launched this week. And we've got a number of sessions scheduled in the coming weeks, and the expectation is staff attend one of those.
Andrew?
Thanks, Mark. On the critical risk side, I just saw some of the updates around contract management and sort of drafting a new policy based on feedback from the working group. So just was kind of keen to hear what that is looking at in terms of that new policy, in terms of what we'll be addressing.
Yeah, so it's looking at contractor management as a whole, and obviously considering our PCBU obligations, and so it's making sure that across that full contractor life cycle from pre-qualification, ensuring that the people engaged in the work are competent and have the necessary training and qualifications, and that we have appropriate safety planning, and we review whether they're safely doing the work.
So that, because we've got a policy already, but this is a revised one, so it's
Yeah.
just, yeah, is it much for, are there some key aspects, some key new aspects going into it? Or was it more sort of a hygiene?
I haven't yet seen the draft updated policy myself, so I'm not sure, but I would envisage stronger requirements in terms of safety planning and reviewing and verifying that those controls are being adhered to.
Yeah, on the so that the contractors have got their own safety planning, and that
Yeah.
we know that is in place.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right, it sounds rather important, so it's good. Cheers.
I got the notice in the paper that we have a drug and alcohol policy under development. Have we never had one, or is there one being revised, or what's?
I don't know if we certainly haven't had one in recent years, so it's not a replace, it's a new situation. I think we'd say that we've just been relying on expectations under the code of conduct. But yeah, it's a case of developing a new policy.
So what's the risk we're looking at here? I know it's contractors for most organisations to have a drug and alcohol policy,
Yeah.
but I mean, you've got that under, as you say, code of conduct. Are people operating machinery? These people are driving, a lot. So, I know that with forestry companies, this is a really significant policy because it has, effects days after people have perhaps participated. So, yeah, Tammy.
Yeah, I'll just add to what Mark said. So primarily through the code of conduct, but we also have reference to zero alcohol in our vehicle policy. So the intent is to bring that into one comprehensive policy around the management of drug and alcohol at ORC, and mitigating those risks of our staff being impaired when undertaking work. And it will also have a component around support and training and rehabilitation as well.
Ultimately, we just want clarity for staff. That's what we're after. So rather than have it in specific vehicle or code of conduct, we know it's a risk of the organisation, so we just put it in one policy, and then everyone's very clear around what our policies are for those things. It's an important one. As you can imagine. So the team are doing a really good job just engaging with staff, so nothing's a surprise, and they get the chance to participate in its development.
Yep. So will the policy have random drug testing in it?
That's a consideration in the development of the policy. So we will be considering what testing, and it will articulate in the circumstances that we do and don't test. Yeah, but still to be worked through.
Yeah.
I was just wondering how prescription medication was being considered in that, including things that might show up into like medicinal cannabis or things like that.
Yeah, that's certainly a key consideration. It's something a number of councils are grappling with, but and we will have to work through that detail, but we would envisage clear onus on declaration, and working through that with the people leader and potentially our team. The tricky thing would be where they need to take on a regular basis and it can potentially impair their work. That would be the more tricky scenario, but hopefully in most cases it can be managed.
Kevin.
Well, what is the time frame around this? We've sort of been going for probably 18 months now, I
Yeah.
suppose. Yeah,
Yeah.
so what's
So we've completed stage one, which was initial staff feedback, and like Richard said, that's been really intentional to take staff on the journey. We've had a good discussion with LT. Next week we've got a session with health and safety reps, and then we get into developing the draft policy that'll go out for staff consultation, which I think would probably be about April. So it's around May, June that we would be expected to be in a position to publish and plan our implementation steps, the training and identifying a testing provider, that kind of thing.
Thanks, mate. Thank you.
Andrew.
Thanks for including the overall plan for health, safety and wellbeing. Chrissy's a 3-year plan from 2024, 25 and 26. So I guess over 3 financial years.
Yep.
And we're in the middle year at the moment. So when I just look through that and see what's been completed, it was last year or this year, what's a work in progress, and then some of them which don't have a status, I assume, and haven't started yet. How are you feeling, considering we're in March with June year end sort of 3 months away, in terms of getting through the activities which are on that plan? Because there's some quite important sort of topics to get covered.
Yeah, as you can see, there's a huge amount in there. Very fortunate to have an amazing team that are very dedicated, especially given they do this on top of day-to-day service delivery. We are continually monitoring and reprioritising, but in general, we're feeling fairly comfortable with where we're at across health and safety and wellbeing team and the people and culture team.
And that's great. It's good to hear that you are comfortable, because there is when I look at the plan, I do like it in terms of what it is covering.
Yeah.
So by all means, if you can get through it, then that's great.
Kate, I see your hand up.
Thank you. I'm just interested in the two things. One is the sick day. Are staff allowed to accumulate those? And is there a maximum they can accumulate?
Yes, they can accumulate that. They can accumulate up to.
I'm just double checking.
Yeah.
And is that a normal thing in public service?
So they can accumulate up to 60 days. I don't have particular benchmarking offhand, but I would expect that it would be. And some councils have gone as far as unlimited sick leave. Not many, but a few that are more progressive. I'm comfortable that our sick leave settings are appropriate. We don't want staff at work when they're under the weather and can spread germs.
No,
So-
I'm not. I appreciate we have to manage that. It's more the accumulation, that and how it also sits with leave. And this is the question: are you happy with the leave outstanding, and is that being managed as a liability?
No, so sick leave doesn't get paid out.
No, I appreciate that. I don't. But they're both liabilities in the book if someone gets sick or this. But it's. I'm also wondering about your leave as well.
Oh, you mean annual leave liability?
Yeah.
That's still something we need to look more into and stay on top of.
So just from an ELP perspective, codified add to that. So at the moment, we have a focus on annual leave balances leading into the Christmas break, because that's often the best time for us to ensure where people have higher annual leave balances, that we encourage them to take a longer break as part of managing the overall totals. We do, however, during the year, keep an eye on those with the highest balances and their people leaders, managers, general managers will actively manage that and put a leave plan in place, because we do want to manage those total amounts of leave. So we have seen it improve, but you know, it's something that always needs to be worked on, because the time just goes so quick, and obviously, you know, every few months there's another week being accrued. So it does need active management, particularly for staff that.
Instances at the Christmas time is hard, given that a lot of the monitoring and everything will be done in the summer months. So I appreciate that.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do appreciate that. I'm just, you know, these are liabilities we have to keep on. I am interested in the sick leave, and how that looks. I think it's a very generous policy, which isn't reflected in private. And I appreciate there is a difference, but I wouldn't mind understanding the benchmarks for that, because I think it is a liability potentially for the ratepayers, and it's a fairly unlimited one.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Andrew?
So I will just carry on with the sick leave days, as Kate has mentioned. So I was just thinking through that in my head, the 60 days, which will likely just be 3 years worth of 20 days a year, I imagine, is it? Of so
10
it's
days
built
a
up.
year.
10 days a year, is it? Okay, so it's built up over six years. And then likely the scenario that plays out, I'm just thinking what sort of the sick leave policy could say, or hopefully does say, when someone has taken extended sick leave, there's usually a bit of a, well, not just a discussion, but actually some formal process in place to understand after a certain amount of days what's going on in terms of medical requirements and the likes. So just sort of asking in terms of in your policy, when someone has been on leave, sick leave for more than 5 days, is there a requirement to get a written medical statement?
Yeah, more than 3 days.
More than 3 days, is it? Yep. Okay, great. And then, so that sort of certainly helps. With part of that. I think so. I guess to carry on from Kate's question on it, do we know in terms of benchmarking those days against other councils or organisations what that sits like?
How the 6.1 reported compares?
Or
Or
the
the
60
entitlements?
days. I think it's
Not currently, but I can go and do some benchmarking on that and report back.
Yep, that'd be great. Thank you.
None of other organisations that I've been in, sick leave was always sort of looked at in a couple of ways. One, as a sick leave total, another one perhaps staff morale. So that was, you know, I don't know if there's an alignment there or not, but it was one of the only stats that could possibly be interpreted to be sort of hinting at staff morale. So yeah, thanks for the report. Any other questions? That's great. Thank you, team. So we have, is there anything more you want to add to your report?
Happy to note the report, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Second that.
Moved by Kevin, seconded Alexa. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you. Right, and so we are now just moving into public exclusion. So we have got, I'll read this out, publicly excluded from the following items under Lagoima 48(1)A, confirmation of the minutes of the previous confidential audit in this meeting on the 5th of December, a match fund report and an insurance update. So can I have a mover, please, for that?
I'll move.
Thank you, Andrew, seconder. Alexa, thanks. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
And against? Thank you. We're now moving to non-public.